Good day, everybody. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Very well.
Doing well.
Very
Mason,
well.
you're in a new location today.
Yes, welcome to sunny Palm Springs, where the pavement is hot and the air conditioning runs cool.
The air conditioning never stops.
No, it is perpetual.
Yeah, I feel like there's a Hotel California parody we could do along with that, alongside that one. No, I'm pumped to see you guys today. I feel like the Mazda Miata has just been topped up with fuel, and we're now ready to go for another little stretch of road here. I'm pretty excited about today's topic. I had to do some research and fill in the gaps in my knowledge a bit, of which even after research there is many gaps to be talking about. But today we are going to be talking about guitar pedals that could extend to rack units and a couple of other areas, which will, be obvious soon enough, that changed our industry or changed the course of where we may have been headed, and had to do an abrupt turn because of what was released, thought of, experimented with. So we're basically going to go through and chat through each of our kind of favorite pedals or units that were released that we think really changed the course of the guitar industry and where we were headed with effects. So I don't know if you guys have any initial thoughts, but Mason, any initial thoughts to get us started on the topic? And I don't know, maybe give us a little taste of what's to come.
Well, I guess, do you want me to name a bunch of different effects, or do you want me to sort of stick? Because I think that I think that we could go all the way clear back to the 60s and talk about, fuzz. And
let's talk about your favorite early days.
So
effects that
early
changed
days,
the course.
early days in the timeline of pedals, or early days in like when I was a developing guitar player.
Dealer's choice.
Oh, okay.
Ooh. I'm curious, man. I want to leave it open. I want to see where we end up.
I think
here.
it's more interesting because I think that there's been a lot of people that have done some really great work to sort of detail a lot of the vintage effects, again, starting kind of back with the fuzzes and things like that. I really think for when I was a budding guitar player, the pedal that everybody wanted, that was really expensive, and I think in many ways sort of like without this company and without this pedal, there is no Strymon, who I think arguably is in the digital world probably one of the most game-changing brands out there, was the Line 60 L4. I remember everybody wanted to have that pedal. I remember seeing it in Guitar Center. I remember thinking, how will I ever afford this pedal? It's so expensive.
Do you remember the price tag?
I think that they were around $300, as I recall.
Yeah. Back in the day, that was a pricey pedal.
Yeah, that was a pretty large margin ahead of everything else. And I remember the first pedal that I ever bought was a Tube Screamer, which I think also was a game changer in the world of overdrive, and continues to be one of the kind of classic choices, whether you have a actual Ibanez branded Tube Screamer or you have a derivative. But I just remember everybody wanted the DL4. It had a looper, it had all these different delay algorithms in it. You had presets, you had a tap tempo. It was like everything.
4 foot switches.
Everything a boy ever wanted was right there. And so as a young budding guitar player, I remember really wanting that, and like all the guys that I really looked up to guitar player wise invariably had one of those. And I think Line 6 in that whole generation, if you look at their staff, from that time, and just the number of heavy hitters that were on that roster of people that worked there, it's like you have George Trips, you have James Santiago, you have the entire crew from Strymon working there, Maris, Terry Burton, and Angelo. All these guys were it was just an absolute stockpile. That was like the farm system for what became the boutique manufacturers that were kind of just leading in our industry, and in many ways still do. So I think that for me as a young guitar player. Now we can go and get back into the history of pedals and kind of what things really took shape. But that to me, in my youth, was probably, I think, one of the biggest, most influential pedals that had really consequential effects on the industry and the direction that it went.
I like it. Brian, what about you? Similar vein, anything from when you were an early guitar player that was the guitar pedal to have? If you didn't have it, you might as well just take a violin. Like, was there an effect out there that kind of fit that bill?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when I started really playing was, I think like maybe 2005 or something like that. Like, I'm trying to think of when the year was or anything, but I think the biggest or the most common kind of like thing, the DL4 was like on everyone's board always, and that was something I couldn't afford. So I would get away with like a DD, like I think I would do like a DD3 or DD4 or something. I think that's what they were. I can't remember at the time. But a DD6 was also like a very common, like you had a DD6 with that big old Boss tap tempo switch on the side, and that like right there was like, that was the most common. But for like when it comes to reverb, like I would say I would probably have to pick like a reverb, is because you would get people that would have like a couple like Hall of Fames. They'd have 2 on their board, or I don't think they had the stereo edition at the time, so they had 2 just so they could do a stereo effect, or they did 2 because they had 2 different presets and stuff. Like for like, so like that was like, you know, seeing people using those, but they've also used multiple Holy Grail like reverbs. Like that was another really big one. So yeah, I would have to say, in my time of when I was started playing, it was definitely in that Holy Grail Hall of Fame era of reverb pedals, where there wasn't a lot of presets. It wasn't really fancy. They didn't have the mash reverb. Like I think I have a Hall of Fame here. Yeah. So like this guy, like this mashed version that they have Hall of Fame 2 and stereo out and all these sounds. Like they had some sounds and stuff, but I would say for me, that's kind of like what was like was big at the time. And it was just interesting hearing people having to do 2 devices in order to get like a stereo delay or a stereo reverb or something, because just back then it wasn't, I mean, maybe just in where I lived, people just didn't know, but it just seemed like it wasn't common to have stereo as it is common to have it now. Like I primarily play at church, and it's when you hear people like, oh, you don't play stereo, it's kind of like, they're like, well, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you playing stereo? I'm like, I don't know. It's just because the in-ears are mono, and the system is pretty much mono, so you don't really hear the difference. So maybe that's what it was back then. But yeah, I would have to say the Holy Grail Hall of Fame kind of transition between the 2 was definitely big during my time.
Yeah. I would say when I really started getting into guitar, it was the DD5, the Boss DD5, because it had that external tap tempo jack. And I also, at one point, I bought the DD6, which you mentioned, and that's the one that had the tap built in, but you couldn't do external. You had to hold it down for 2 seconds to get into tap, and then you couldn't turn the pedal off unless you held it down again for 2 seconds and then tapped it a second time and turned it off. And so in my mind, like the DD5 and paired with a tube screamer, that was the sound when I was younger. And that was the pedal board. Like you didn't need anything else. All you needed was a tube screamer and a DD5, and you were with an external tap tempo, the FS5U, and you were good. You were sorted. You didn't need anything else. Life was good. You could afford the rig. It was great, you know. And so as far as I was concerned, that was kind of my reference point for guitar pedals and the sounds I needed to get. And then the apocalypse of guitar happened, and you had to sell everything you had to get the timeline. And I think that was that 2010? Or somewhere around 2010, I think, was the timeline.
Probably somewhere, maybe
might have been a bit earlier.
I'd probably say sometime between 2010 and 2012. I'm sure that we can look it up.
Let's ask Chat GPT here.
It makes sense though, because I remember being, I think, so in 2010 I was 17, and I remember a friend having one, and he was like, "Yeah, it's $399." I think it was still $399. I don't think the price has ever changed. He talked to, it's $429. That's what it was for. I'm thinking of something that was $429, and he was like, "Yeah, it's like it's a little over $400." I'm like, "Oh, I have a Nova Delay I just bought for $100 and whatever dollars." Like that's I'm
and
not
the
gonna
Nova
go buy
Delay and Brian Omilion was born. The pairing was solidified.
Well, it's funny because I had the DD5. I had said the 6, but I misspoke. It was the 5. It's been so long, but like I built that board off of a video that Nigel Hendroff did, and he had a DD5. He had like a full tone OCD, and I think like a tube screamer and a beat up Boss TU2 or something. And I was like, that is my tone. I need that. So I built a lot of that. But I remember my friend getting the timeline and be like, wow, that's amazing. And he's like, yeah, it has all these different delays. So I think it was like 2010 or 11, or I can't remember. Does it say when it came out?
2011.
It was 2011. Okay, 18. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I still didn't have a lot of money back then either. So I mean, I don't now. So it doesn't really matter. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean that was huge as far as game-changing pedals, but I do agree that I don't think the Timeline is a game-changing unit because of the technology or the ideas behind it. I think it was game-changing in its popularity and its mass market appeal, but you have the DL4, which is a digital delay made in 99. So we're talking 12 years earlier, and that wasn't even the first digital delay. I think we go back to 71. Eventide came out with the DDL 1745. So like this isn't new technology. It's just implemented in a pedalboard friendly, way. And so I think, and we'll go over this, I'm sure, like, was the pedal a game changer in and of itself, or was it rehousing technology that already existed in a previous format? I'm not sure, but I did want to go back even further because I was really curious. I know, fuzz in the 60s and overdrive and all that, the first pedals. I was trying to find the first ever guitar effect. And guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I found, and I may butcher this name like I do so many others. Like for years I've been saying Ibanez, and Mason corrected me correctly. Ibanez, I think, is the correct way. And this may be another Ibanez or, debacle. But the late 1940s. D'Armond, D'Armond came out with a tremolo pedal, late 1940s. Because I always think guitar effects, I'm like, yeah, that was around the 60s, overdrives, fuzzes. And then I was like, wow, back in the 40s. And even earlier than that, I want to see if you guys consider this a guitar effect. Rickenbacker came out with an electro vibrola, which was basically a guitar that had a motor in the bridge, and it would move back and forth and give you a vibrato sound built into the guitar. So I'm thinking a motor that is set to a certain speed, whether it's on the floor or in the guitar, that's a guitar effect in my mind. And that's in the 30s. And so like guitar, if you would consider that a guitar effect, back in the 30s already, we're talking about guitar effects and externally changing the sound in real time of the instrument. I thought that was a lot earlier than I thought it would be. And then we go into the 60s, and this is where I'll let Mason take over because this is more, I've heard you talk about this at length. Like, do you want to talk about early overdrive, early fuzz, and what that did kind of to get things kickstarted?
Well, I think fuzz is a jumping off point for most of the stuff as it relates to distortion, and I think that although fuzz has become a category of its own, I think they were just looking for ways to distort the guitar sounds and create more of an overdriven sound, and the transistors were kind of the easiest way to be able to do that, and the technology that was available at the time. And so you saw the Maestro fuzz, and the tone benders and the fuzz faces. And these were kind of all using the technology of the day, the transistor, and creating distortion from that in order to get the sound that we've come to all know and love, and that was used on hit records, whether we're talking about stuff from the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or Jimi Hendrix. These were all things that were, the sound of distortion at the time. And then as we got into the 70s, you started to see more of an evolution of the fuzz sound with things like the Big Muff from American companies like Electro Harmonics. And I don't think that we really see what we consider the true overdrive in the sense that we kind of have come to identify it now until the Boss OD1. And I think that was in the late 70s. And then, of course, you have the Tube Screamer, which is an amazing pedal and is still, I think, relevant to this day. I think that was most certainly a game changer as it relates to distortion pedals. That in combination with the OD1s kind of being the first of the overdrives that were sort of marketed as stomp boxes. I think there could be a case to be made for a lot of different Boss pedals as kind of being really influential game changers. But I think maybe more than any one of their pedals, it was sort of the whole brand created this effects craze. They were releasing effects that were sort of the benchmark for every single style of effect, whether that be delay, whether that be overdrive, whether that be chorus, whether that be flanger. They were addressing sort of all of the core sounds. Boss was also the first to release a stomp box version of a digital delay with the DD2. That was the first of its kind. There was nothing else like that as far as stomp boxes were concerned at the time. The CE1 chorus, that was kind of still a seminal chorus that is
the
sort
first
of
Boss pedal as well.
I don't know if it was
76 is what I found, or it's the first chorus pedal.
I don't know if it was the first Boss pedal or the first chorus pedal commercially. I'm not sure. I know that basically that it came out of the amplifier that they were making, the Roland Jazz chorus, and it's essentially the chorus vibrato circuit out of that. Is that the first Boss pedal ever made? I don't know. I'm not. This would be a question for Josh Scott. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert historian as far as the sequencing of pedals. But that's certainly, the chorus that launched 1,000 ships, so to speak. And there's so many choruses that are derivative of that. And then I think in overdrive world, other than the Tube Screamer, I think the Klon was an extremely influential, game changing overdrive. I would say if what the Tube Screamer was to the 80s, as far as people adopting that pedal and it really being on every pedal board for guitar players, I think the Klon eventually became that in the 90s, and now it's untouchable for most guitar players. But I remember getting my first Klon a Centaur and buying it in a city in the Bay Area called Alameda. I remember meeting this guy at his house. He lived on this canal in Alameda, and I think I paid like $250 for it. So but that pedal, I mean, there's like there's whole brands in a side of the industry that's just dedicated to that circuit. Like that. How could it be any more game changing than that?
I love it. I want to keep this going, but first I want to tell you guys about two of our incredible sponsors. The first one I want to chat to you guys about is the Guitar Sanctuary, where Brian himself is sitting right now. You got to know you love a music store when you're recording Chairman of the Boards straight from inside the four walls. So Guitar Sanctuary provides, I'm not going to say all of the gear we're talking about today, because some of this stuff you just cannot get. But if it is currently in production and we're talking about it today, you can most likely get it at theguitarsanctuary.com. And then you can get Brian himself, soon to be redubbed Brian Omilion, as we've talked about on the show. That's how good he is. You can get him to set up that gear on a pedal board, go home with a smile on your face, and play some sweet tones. So the guitarsanctuary.com is kind of like your one-stop shop for guitar pedals, setups, boards, all of the above. So check that out, theguitarsanctuary.com. I also want to tell you guys about Sweetwater's new gear exchange. This is, as Mason has mentioned in the past, kind of a nice mix of all the things we love about Reverb, Craigslist, eBay, but without all the crazy fees that come along with it. So the gear exchange is a great place to sell and find used and new guitar gear. And the great thing about it, the game-changing thing about it, if you will, is that you can take the money that you make selling gear there, put it on a Sweetwater gift card, and you can just say no thanks to all the fees that a third-party seller would usually take so they can stay in business. You can just keep it on a gift card and then use it to buy more gear at sweetwater.com and at the Gear Exchange. So check that out, sweetwater.com/used. And I think you'll be glad you did. So that is two of our sponsors for today, making this episode possible. I do want to get back into it with one of my favorites, I think, so far. And this one, I don't know if you guys are going to agree with me or not, but it is in 1998. There was a pedal or a multi-effects unit that was released that I think is a game changer. If you look at today,
can we guess as to what it is?
I want you to guess.
Can you give us some hints? Can you give us some hints other than 98 and multi-effects?
It is variations of it, or let's say future iterations are definitely still being produced.
Okay.
It's a decently large multi-effects unit.
Okay.
Pedal, it's like a floor unit, so we're not talking racks as far as I'm aware. Okay. 98, this company is probably not best known for its amp and cab sim technology, but they're quite good at it, along with other multi-effects algorithms and all that type of thing. I don't want to give too much away. 1998.
Is it a Nova system?
No. I'll give you one hint here. This will probably give it away. The company famously made a kidney bean shaped unit.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Pod.
Line 6 pod.
Line 6 pod.
Mm-hmm. The reason, and again, correct me if my research is wrong here, guys, but the reason is, as far as I can tell, they were one of the first to come out with impulse response technology, and they put it in the pod in 1998. And if you look at where we're at now with impulse responses, amp capturing, digital recreations of analog gear, I think that's a game-changing unit, in my opinion. But I'm going to stop and I'm going to let you guys give me your thoughts, because I want you to poke holes in my theory, if there are any holes to be poked. What do you guys think?
I don't have as much experience with it. The little bit of experience I do, so I'm not going to talk long on it. I remember it was probably when I was just starting out playing guitar. My best friend and I growing up, his dad had one in the office of his of where he worked at the church. So we're like, oh, this is super cool. It's sitting on the shelf, not using it. So we took it into like our youth room or something and plugged it in the system and just plugged it in. We literally had no idea what the heck we were doing. It did not sound good at the time because we did not know what we were doing. We did not know what sounds we were using. But the more and more, later in life going on, I would keep seeing people using those kind of things. I'm like, what the heck is this kidney bean? And I looked and I remember it was a thing, and like diving into this stuff, if I had, known what to do, it's a cool unit. I got to say that. I don't have as much live playability with it, but I remember starting out going, what the heck is this thing? But in 98, the technology and stuff of that kind of stuff, it was cool.
And I'm not saying necessarily that I like it. Like I would now, yeah. Even at the time that I would put it on my board and be like, man, this is the best thing that's ever happened, as far as my tone goes. I'm just saying, I think that was something that opened people's eyes to maybe, a new facet of the industry and what could potentially be done and where manufacturers could expand their pedal line, like you take it now 20 plus years later, almost 25 years later, and we're into the Universal Audio Dream and, you know, the Ruby and all that. And I think Line 6 kind of kickstarted that.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
area.
The HX Stomp, they have the HX Stomp, which is very common on a lot of boards, which kind of seems like it is the combination of that. Is it, what's it called? Just the pod? Is it just
the pod? I don't know if that was the kidney bean. I think that was the Pod Go. I could be incorrect. Like the pod now, you can get giant pods that are just huge multi-effects. It's not just that kidney bean thing. So I don't think that was the first one they put out. But just the pod line had that IR tech in it from 1998. So yeah. So I just thought that was interesting because I know, like, I would have assumed if someone asked me when did IR technology come out, I probably would have said, you know, 2008, 2006, something around there. I didn't know it was in the 90s. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I know, Mason, I know that you're more into the, you know, a real tube amp or analog effects if you can get to them. By no means are you anti-digital. But any thoughts on that?
Uncle Digital, not anti-digital.
Uncle Dig.
So I had this one pedal. We've talked about it before. The Digitech RP50.
Oh yeah,
is that the one with the 2 and it's gray with the blue writing on it? Is that one?
Let me see if I can share it real quick, just so y'all can see it.
This is the one that you have. This is the one you have tattooed on your body, right? Oh yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
I remember this.
Yeah. So this guy, kid you not, bought it a couple months ago on Facebook Marketplace for $13, and the guy threw in free shipping. Yeah. So like it's as simple input.
He wanted to get rid of that thing. He was willing to lose money.
So bad. He was just like, thank you. I was just trying to get rid of it. It's been sitting on it because he had listed for like 50, and then you can see in Marketplace it kept going down in price. And I was like, will you take? I'm like, this is how much I have in whatever. And he's like, sure, I'll take it. But it was released in 2002. And the reason I say is I remember having this pedal. This was the first pedal I had, and I ran it into a crate 1x12. Like this little combo amp, but I ran the pedal straight into it, and it had all the effects and stuff in there, multi effects, because you could turn different stuff on and off. But I never realized it until I rebought it that it had amp and cab types built into it. So I like,
no way,
so it does. I don't have it here. I should have brought it, but if I can pull it up, I don't know if you can see it. I'll try resharing it and zooming in. I can't like zoom in because I don't have my computer part right in front of me. But okay, yeah, so it's right there. So looking at it. The reason I want to show this because it's just fun. Because if looking at it, you can see amp model. I think it's just amp model. So that has noise gate, has all. So if you guys, I don't know if you guys can even see that. Let me see if I can get a closer view of it. Whatever that. What? Oh, sure. So zooming
controversial in. Accepting cookies, Brian.
Right? Hey, I guess it doesn't let me. So
you can change your pickups, huh? Amp model.
Yeah. Amp model, noise gate, EQ. I guys got to tell you this. So I built a board for someone not as a joke. The board was real. I really built a board. But then I had this hidden like under the board somewhere or like off on the side, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this sounds amazing! This delay and reverb of his board." And I'm playing through it, and he's like, "Man, this is so great. What pedals are on? I don't see any LEDs on." It was a friend of mine, so this is why I did it. And I literally picked it up, and he goes, "What is that?" I was like, "The RP50." I'm like, he goes, "That's amazing. Is it new?" And I was like, "No, this sucker came out years ago." I was like, "I got it just today for like $13 on Facebook," and he was shocked. But what's funny is hearing this kind of stuff in 2002, like if you could go through the manual and you had all these effects and stuff, and you could use these buttons to scroll through your presets and stuff, like it, like at the time, it seems like it was like a really cool, like all-in-one option. Obviously, I was probably running this pedal in the preset mode. I think I used like preset 14, which was like their insane model. or insane mode or whatever. So distorted amp into a clean ish whatever really crappy combo amp. It's just interesting to go back and be like, wow, this pedal is actually really good now that I know what I'm looking for. It's just it was cool to see that came out in 2002, and like that's the kind of stuff that they had. I mean, that's just like you said, the pod go, or kidney bean or whatever. So yeah, I just had to share that. That was cool to see. That was in 2002, and I mean, I know that they do other stuff right now, but it was actually, I'll have to find a video or play it or something, but it's a decent, it's
you know what we should
sounding.
do? It would be really fun as a follow-up episode to that conversation. We each get like $100 and we can go on Facebook Marketplace and we have to create a pedal board with $100 so like a $13 RP50 and a wall wart for $5. I don't know. It'd be really interesting to see what you can get. And then we can blind play the audio so we don't see what's on the board and actually see if it's sounding good or if it absolutely sounds like garbage, and then the big reveal. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's great. 2002 RP50, 1998 with a pod. My next one, I think I had the DL4 on there also as a game-changing unit. Although, fun little fact, I've never actually owned a DL4, which I feel like is blasphemous. I apologize, guys.
Me either.
I feel comfortable enough to be open and honest, but I also have to let you know that I do feel a little ashamed. I will get a DL4 one day. The next game-changing pedal for me was 10 years later.
Okay.
And is a company that I think as a whole, if you look over history, has been, as a company, a game-changing company, was Eventide H9.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was an incredible unit. I love the fact that something I used all the time because it didn't have very many knobs on the H9 is you could just open up your phone, you could go over Bluetooth, you could make changes in real time. You could do kill, dry, and normal mode per preset, which almost no pedals allow you to do. The algorithms are incredible on the H9, and it's a small form factor. And so for me, I think especially the Bluetooth and the app and being able to make change any parameter, I thought that was, I don't know if they were the first for that, but that was huge for me and something I thought really changed the way I approach my pedal board and how I set it up and MIDI and all that type of thing. Obviously now they have the H90, which is a very recent, what would you call it? A two effect version of it, allowing you to do a whole bunch of different routing combinations and parallel series, all that type of thing. But the H9 and Eventide as a whole, I think has done so much for the guitar industry. I don't know what else to say about it, but any thoughts? Would you guys agree, or what do you think about Eventide and or H9 for the guitar industry since the 70s up until now?
Yeah, no, I have to agree. It's always fun to go back and watch those like Premier Guitar rig rundown videos where they talk about people and the gear they're using, and it's not surprising when you see some people open up their racks and they have like 3 or 4 of these in their rack and they're like, it just sounds good. Like, I mean, obviously, everyone was like, man, I wish I could run a vibrato and a chorus, a vibrato and a tremolo at the same time.
Yeah.
So then the H90, so you can do that. But like, we're just like seeing like people like Stu G uses 2 H9s on his board, delay and reverb, and he'll kind of change his parameters. But it's always interesting to see how people will use them, especially when they're in switchers or if they're not in switchers, but how they have it wired to do like the pre-post thing. So some effects are pre and some of them are post, which for the longest time, like I never knew that was a thing. And then when I got one, I was like, oh, I did a board for a guy. He had 4 H9s on his board. They were all copper. I remember it. It was this massive, like 39 by 24. It was this massive studio board. It had multiple tiers, but it had 4 copper ones. And I was like, why? He goes, well, I really like the algorithms. I'm like, well, you have 25 other pedals on your board. Like, do those not justify the H9s? He says, no, because how I'm going to have you wire it pre and post, their pre and post like every couple pedals. So depending on what I want, I can, pull the overdrive sound from the H9 into my overdrive chain, or I can pull modulation or delay or reverb. And he goes, the pre and post, depending on with the switcher, with the PBC10, just allows it to, interject in all these different areas. And like, he goes, for an all-in-one box, it's really amazing. So now kicking forward to the H90, having that same pre-post option, but having 4 ins and 4 outs, I think it is 1, 2, 3, 4 ins, 4 outs. Like the combinations is just like, I was talking to a client last night and I put my phone down. Like the problem is when I go home, I still get messages and stuff. And so I put my phone down and I ate dinner and I opened up my message to have like 30 messages from this one guy who was just like, sorry, I'm having all these epiphanies of things I should do with the H90. And I was like, every one of those options you can do. Every single point you have is valid, but don't get overwhelmed with option galore. So that's the cool thing about the H9 and 90 is you can have a lot of options. And like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of these algorithms that they have are from, staple rack units and stuff that they, if I'm wrong, I mean, I think it's a lot of their staple rack units that they've had back. So now they put that in a pedal. And, it's having a rack is fun. I have people that are building racks just for fun. I think David is building one who works with you. David Hislop. He's building a rack just for fun, just because he wants to, and it's a lot of that old Eventide rack stuff. So it's cool to see people that will utilize the H9 or 90 in these different ways, because not every guitarist building is going to be the same. So I have to completely, that long rant to say yes, I completely agree with you. The H9 90 is definitely one of those staple kind of like can really, like I tell people all the time, like, man, if you don't know what to do, you could get an H9 that has a lot of great options in it that you could utilize.
And Eventide as well, and maybe Mason, I'll get you to chime in after this, but Eventide they've been around since the early 70s. And again, just from kind of looking into things in a bit more detail, they came out with a digital rack delay in 1745. And that was at the time game changing because it replaced these like guitar players, vocalists, recording engineers who were using tape or reel to reel could now use this Eventide unit. And what I found out as well, for Eventide to even make this thing work, they had to create their own analog to digital converter at the time because the technology wasn't there yet. Like if you're talking about game changing companies, creating your own analog to digital converter just to get a pedal to work was crazy. And back something else that came up about that specific unit, I think in today's dollars that thing would have cost almost $25,000 to buy one of them for your studio. So it was not cheap, but very popular at the time. And then they come out with harmonizer and they come out with all sorts of different rack stuff. But Eventide, I mean, Mason, I know you know a lot of artists that have used it over the years and in their racks and what that has done and the sounds that we probably now take for granted. Anything you want to say in that front? And
they were absolutely game changing. I think what people don't realize about Eventide is they don't just do music; they do like aerospace stuff, and they're one of the, I think as far as engineering is concerned, one of the leading brands, and kind of always has been. Whether you're talking about the early rack delays, or I think their most important unit, which was the H3000, that defined an era of guitar sounds through that unit. That was pretty much a mainstay on most rack rigs in the 80s and 90s, and for a lot of players still is. Super important. I think the Eventide Eclipse, which is kind of, you could argue the H9 is sort of an abbreviated pedal version of what the Eclipse was. That was has just tremendous amount of firepower for a rack unit. So
and that would be multi-effects, right?
Yeah, multi-effects. Yep.
Yeah.
So just really, really great stuff. They've always been, I think on the leading edge for digital. And I want to keep talking about all of this stuff. I want to turn it over to Dr. Brian Omilion, for some ads from some sponsors that make podcasts possible.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. Appreciate it. Now I got to teach my kids how to spell their new last name. It'll be fun. Anyway, one of the amazing sponsors that makes this podcast happen every single time is our newest friends, one of our newest friends, Neural DSP. I have a lot of experience with just running their quad cortex system right now, and it's a fantastic system. You guys are messing with their plugins, which are amazing, and I have never used their plugins, but I always see, every time I see people doing videos or studio stuff, they always have their plugins there, and they're amazing. They sound amazing. But they have a discount code, Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, for 30% off their plugins. So if you are, you do plugin stuff, you work in the studio and you need plugins, go get some of their plugins for 30% off. 30% off does not apply to their quad cortexes or their newest plugins, but those new plugins will be available after 90 days of their release date. So check them out. Go get some plugins and support another great company, as well as mono creators. We talk about mono all the time. I have backpacks. I got stuff everywhere of mono creator backpacks and gig bags and pedal boards, and they just make some really amazing angled boards, as Grant has said in the past, and they're really spacious underneath, and they're really durable. They're pedal boards and they're backpacks and their cases, they're dual, they're single, all those cases.
It just came out with a new power supply too.
And they just came out with a new power supply, which we never know.
We should check that out. Future
episode, yeah. But so go give them some love and some support with their code Chairmen as well, CHAIRMEN, for 10% off. 10% off, like we always say, it's 90% away from free.
Truth.
So go give them some support, buy up some of their their cases, protect your investment, your boards, your guitars, or your pedals, buy their supplies. So go check them out, and that's it for me. I'll throw it back to you, Mason.
So Eventide, I think, was where we left off. I think that they're incredibly important in the arc of the industry. One thing I was considering or thinking about as we were talking about this is I think that there's some companies where maybe individual pedals are sort of what define the greatness of the company. And then there's other examples, I think, where just the brand as a whole sort of morphs the industry and changes the way that the industry thinks about equipment, or the way that sort of the social aspect of the industry interacts. And I think, I don't know if we're going in that direction, but I would want to name that I think that JHS certainly has had this influence socially on equipment and gear. And that's not saying that his effects don't sell plenty or are popular or sound great, because they are all those things. But I think almost more than any of his effects, his social influence on the culture of guitar pedals and gear, that's something that really no brand has done. And maybe, in fairness, didn't have the infrastructure to do, because social media didn't exist for a lot of these brands. They didn't have the option to market in the way with which Josh is marketing his products, and not only his products, but making sort of the ecosystem of guitar pedals a friendly environment for all brands to coexist, to plug other brands, to really talk about what makes other products great. And I think that this is a really interesting turn that most companies seem to, kind of bury the face of the company often. They kind of just look like these monoliths of, the CEO is not really a person, and the engineers aren't really people. And you're just sort of looking at this brand as almost like a corporate entity. Whereas it's almost the exact opposite with JHS, where he's very front and center. He has a very enticing personality for most people. And I think that he is just really positive about all of the stuff that's going on with pedals, and really is just trying to celebrate the industry, and I think that this is sort of, I think people like him are very responsible for revitalizing interest in pedals and continuing to kind of ride this wave of sort of boutique pedal sort of collection and appreciation that I think has really helped our business consequentially. I think every pedal manufacturer owes him quite a bit in sort of keeping the interest and the momentum going for guitar pedals. So I wanted to mention that as an aside. As far as I think influence separately from any individual pedals, of course, I'm happy to get back into individual pedals or brands that were influential over time, but thought that was worth interjecting.
No, I love it. I think it's fair. And there's some, there's some other companies or brands that have a really generous YouTube channel or really generous social medias where they just kind of want people to learn and give things away. I know like Mason with Vertex and the Rig Doctor and stuff, there's so much DIY and stuff like that you really help guitar players out with. And obviously, a ton of other brands with a huge social following. But JHS, I mean, yeah, undeniably are probably one of the ones that people would go to, and all Josh has to do is talk about one pedal that's $50, and next thing you know, it's $600, and he. But even just listening to him, it makes you want to be more of a pedal nerd. Like you just listen to him, chat, like, man, I had no idea, and you're talking about this rich history and how this pedal came to be that we now take for granted, and you hear some of the behind the scenes stuff, and it's fascinating, and the way he presents it really does draw you in. And I think they kind of have a unique way of doing that, which is great, and obviously we all appreciate. But even that, I think that lends itself to one of the other things I wanted to bring up, which is probably just a really quick aside, but I think one of the biggest things to influence us and just about every other company on the face of the planet is just the accessibility of having everything online. The amount of companies that have been started, Goodwood Audio being one of them, because I was like, I don't want to pay someone else to do this. I'm going to figure out how to do it myself without being able to look stuff up, find schematics, teach myself online. Goodwood wouldn't exist, and just about every other boutique company, possibly even JHS, because I know he started with mods and he started with figuring out circuits, and JHS kind of came out of that. But just the accessibility of having everything online has, for better or worse, created the boutique industry, in my opinion, or at least the vastness of it, and how many small companies exist because of that. And so now, you'd mentioned the Klassen earlier, or TS9s, these overdrives, and we have companies based on these circuits because they taught themselves how to build them from online schematics, YouTube videos. They learned how to solder doing it that way, like all this stuff. And so I think having easy access has created tons of these different brands. Although I wouldn't say, and I would include Goodwood Audio in this as well, that these boutique brands, specifically some of the smaller ones, and happy to be challenged on this, these boutique brands in and of themselves are probably not game-changing brands. They aren't coming out with stuff like Eventide's H3000 because they don't have the R&D capabilities or the budgets or the knowledge, frankly, to be able to do it. But I think as a whole, having the boutique industry has been a bit of a game changer in how we approach it and what we have access to.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you guys want to fill that in at all or tell me that, Grant, you are a total idiot. What are you talking about?
No, I think that is a great point, because there's so many of these companies, like you just said, that don't have the capability, that they've set the foundation for so many other companies that are inspired to create something new and push the limits. And who would have thought whoever built the first true bypass loop switcher with triple pull double throw switches they would come out with that, and they would be loud and they would click and they would pop, and they do all these things to having gig rig or RJM where you can rearrange the order, you can do parallel and series. So I think it's cool to see with every new release, it's always the, well, what's next kind of thing. I'm gonna buy this $900 pedal, the H90. What's gonna come out next? The H1000 or whatever. Like, there's all these people who are like, what's next? And it's just like, that's the cool thing. It's like, I got a guy yesterday. He goes, man, I've had this pedal for 10 years. I'm like, well, there's also been like 9 versions from other companies since then. They're like, really? I'm like, oh yeah. When this pedal gets released, like, everyone's like, sure, let's try it. Let's try our hand. And that's the cool thing about the guitar market, is that everyone gets to try their own flavor. Not every guitarist, not all the hands and tone and everything. Everyone has different tastes and stuff. But like, it's always cool to see when one product comes out. You literally, it's not like, it is like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I'm so happy for JHS releasing the Morning Glory. It ends up being that plus, I wonder what the next pedal will be that someone's going to take this as inspiration to create their own thing. So I agree with you. I think it's a great foundation that some of these pedal companies set, that now we have the Quad Cortex from Neural that can do all that crazy quad routing and stuff.
Yeah. Mason, any thoughts on that before we move on to the next topic?
I think that the boutique industry is very much launched by the DIY stuff, the free stomp boxes and people feeling empowered to have the tools and maybe some of the resources that used to be sort of restricted to people who are willing to read manuals and technological publications and app notes for parts manufacturers. That there used to be limited ways that you could learn to even build pedals. Maybe you were reading the Craig Anderton publications in Guitar Player magazines, where he would talk about how to build certain types of circuits, and maybe people would be inspired by that and try it. But I think that as the internet age came about, you had a lot more people that could get into this with maybe a lower starting point skill wise, and could make something that sounded pretty decent. And I think that the true boutique industry, I think has a lot of, I think it's very foundational in a lot of the ways that we see pedals today. I think there aren't that many true boutique makers anymore where they're building out of their garages or something like that. I think maybe an exception could be somebody like Paul Cochran with the Timmy. I think he still makes those himself, and then has sort of a production line version through MXR that you can get as sort of a mini pedal version of the Timmy. But he still, is sort of like a homegrown operation, and he makes them out of his house. And he's made, I think, arguably a very influential pedal circuit-wise that, other people have copied, I think, notably. But I think he's kind of the originator of that circuit, and I think it commands a lot of respect in our industry. And I think that pedal commands a lot of respect of players because of how it sounds. But I think that the internet age has been really interesting to see how it's influenced things, and how the boutique industry, I think, can be largely credited with the evolution of the internet as kind of creating this sort of subsection or subcategory of the industry, which is in essence, I think at its core, not with everybody, but in a lot of cases, taking classic circuits and sort of remaking them with the twist, and some of them are based off of modded pedals that then were adapted into production line pedals of the manufacturer's own name. Or in other cases, like with Robert Keeley, I'd say his modded pedals are as famous or more famous than some of his production line pedals, because and that's not to take away from his skill level, which is tremendous, but he created such identifiable mods that, Boss stopped supplying him Boss pedals and basically made Wazacraft pedals with his mods in them because they were so pervasive and such improvements.
Is that how it came about?
This is my understanding, not from Robert himself, but through the grapevine that, Robert Keeley started to release his own products that included some of his mods because a lot of these brands stopped supplying him pedals, because he used to be basically a dealer for Boss, where they would
Yeah.
he would buy pedals from them. They would send it to him. He would mod them and sell the pedals new but pre-modded. So
Crazy.
yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah, Keeley
stuff.
mods are huge.
Yeah.
And Keeley, as far as influential, I mean, you talk about like Keeley 3-knob compressors or 4-knob compressors, like those in and of themselves are massively popular. And you know, there was a time when I was newer to guitar, it was, at least in my small sphere, if you talked compressors, like, oh, I have a compressor on my board, it's like, oh, which Keeley one do you have? Like, it was, you know, Keeley was just the brand for a little while, especially for those compressors. And then his mods, Keeley mods was such a popular thing. You're talking about tube screamers or different Boss pedals.
That's how I got into pedals. That's how I got into pedals, was through Robert Keeley.
Via Keeley? Yeah. See, like it's very impressive. Brian, do you had something to say? I think.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment, just like seeing, like, I had the Blues Driver. Yeah, just like one of the first ones overdrives I had. I think I had like the Blues Driver and like a full tone pedal or something like that. And I remember having that pedal and then seeing people having some Keeley modded Blues Driver, or JHS had a mod too at the time too. So like because JHS used to do the same thing. He used to mod the pedals too. The Nova Delay was one of them, and the Blues Driver, and I think the tubes, some different stuffs he did. But then so seeing like the Blues Driver being modded from Keeley and then working with Andy and seeing that, you know, he loved that mod that they did, and then they ended up coming out with his own pedal with Keeley of his. And I remember asking, I was like, so like, what is it based off? He's like, it's like a Blues Driver with the mod that they did at the time, and it's just like as an option. So I agree. I think it's interesting to see like that same thing, like him, you know, starting out. It's cool to see people like him starting out modding stuff and then just going from there.
Love it. Guys, I want to go into one last section today before we pull over and take a bit of a rest here in the Miata. Before we get there, though, and to give you a heads up, just so you guys can start forming thoughts here as well, I'm throwing this at you a little bit left of field. I want predictions for what is going to be the next industry-changing, thing to happen as far as effects go. Before we get there, I want Mason to tell us about our last two incredible sponsors that make the podcast possible.
So the first sponsor which makes this podcast possible is our friends over at Bestronix, btpa.com. And if you're building a pedal board yourself, or you need supplies, whether that be cables, whether that be plugs, whether that be zip ties, tie-down mounts, 2.1 or 2.5 millimeter barrel connectors for your power supply, or RCA connectors if you have a Chalks power supply that you're going to be customizing the cable length. Anything that you can think of related to pedal boards, Bestronix has it. And they're offering our listeners 10% off anything store-wide using the coupon code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS. Just like the old SNL skit where they talk about the Bears, because BTPA is based in the Chicagoland area and Brad has that beautiful Chicagoan accent. We're in keeping with that with our coupon code DACHAIRS, 10% off at BTPA. Secondly, I want to talk about Stringjoy at stringjoy.com. Now, I am a notorious string destroyer. I have very corrosive sweat on my hands, and I've always struggled to find an uncoated string that had the longevity of a coated string. Often I would be relegated to using those coated strings that can just sound dead straight out of the box, even though they last a much longer period of time. However, now with Stringjoy, I can use a regular, uncoated set of strings and get the longevity and the performance of an uncoated string. Absolutely love it. I have been migrating all of my guitars over to the Stringjoy strings and couldn't be happier. They are offering our listeners 10% off any order, whether that's a subscription order to have strings delivered to your door every single month, or just to order some strings a la carte. Use the coupon code BOARDS, BOARDS, get 10% off over on stringjoy.com.
Off the back of that corrosive sweat comments, me, Mason, and Brian have never met in person. I've thought about this first meeting whenever it's going to happen, and I look forward to it. Although I have to say, Mason, I'm starting to consider, like, should I bring some gloves for the first time I shake your hand, because I don't want to get burns on my hand from corrosive sweat. Like, are we going to be okay here? Or
Well, time will tell.
Doug, yeah, well, indeed it will. I still can't wait. Burns and all, I will take second-degree burns on my hands if it means I get to hang out with you guys in person.
Yeah.
I will go there.
Some people pay great money for it. My OnlyFans handle is Acid Hands, and I just touch different types of metals.
Acid spelt with 2 S's? Acid?
I just touch different types of metals to see how they react.
And then 2 days later, you come back and check out the results. So predictions, guys. I want to hear predictions on what is going to be the next thing. Obviously, we can listen back in a few years and we can revisit to see if any of us were anywhere close to the mark. I already have somewhat of a thought in mind of something I would love to see as a game-changing effect. But if one of you guys is ready to go a little trigger happy and you just want to go for it, now's your time.
I'll go. I'm going.
Thank you, Brian. Go for it.
I have a feeling, and it's only because I've seen this happen before in the past, is people get on social media and they'll mock up a pedal that they want to see, or they'll do like the April Fools. Oh my gosh, this company's releasing that kind of thing. I have been seeing a couple people photoshopping like Kemper onto a UA pedal. I'm not saying it's going to look like a UA pedal, but I have a feeling that, because Kemper's been around forever. They have the toaster, they have the stage, They have the rack unit. They've been all over the place. But we've never seen a pedal-sized platform from them, even if it's just their amps. It doesn't have to be their effects. It could be their effects. If it is, that's a lot in a box. I could see something like that coming out, hopefully that, they're listening, because someone posted it and literally like 1,000 comments, people are like freaking out as if it was actually going to happen. So I could see something like that being possibly a thing, as more companies maybe coming out with their version. I mean, TC released, as we talked about, TC released their amp cap type of version pedal, and seeing more companies coming out with. I mean, you could see UA doing, not UA, Neural DSP. I don't know. I was blanking on the name. Neural doing a even more pedal small little platform, which would be cool. A little screen like that. So I would say my guess is going to be, in the future, hopefully, maybe seeing something from Kemper coming out that's in a pedal form size, just to kind of, be a, not that they're not a staple, but see them back on more boards, because, I've put a toaster on a pedalboard before. Let's just say it was not convenient. It was very heavy, but that's what they wanted. So we'll see. But that's my prediction.
Nice. I like it. Mason, do you want to go?
I think you're going to see a Strymon multi-effects.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I think you're going to see eventually like a Strymon kind of like M9, M13 sort of thing.
Yep.
Because I think
predicted price.
I think at least $999, maybe $1,400. I don't know. Okay. I think that basically that seems to be the evolution. Like a lot of what they've done is sort of mirrored a lot of what the Line 6 sort of rollouts have looked like. I think that would be the next possible evolution, that maybe takes the top 5 algorithms in delay, reverb, and modulation, or more potentially, and sort of put it under one roof. I know for just the direction that a lot of people are going, they're using things like the HX Stomp. They're using things like the Neural DSP. Strymon kind of has a lot of the sort of flagship products in each of those categories. Like they could have an Iridium in there, they could have the Timeline Mobius and Big Sky in there, and even some of their overdrives in compressor, and they could be covering the majority of the bases and kind of have the, arguably a more user-friendly, simplified version of, some of the crazy software stuff that some of these other companies offer. I would also really love to see, this is maybe less of a prediction and more of a request, is something like the G System to come back out from TC Electronic, because the G System at the time was a very game-changing device, I think. And I think that the sounds were great. It was basically like the Nova systems in all of the various types that they had, whether it was overdrives, delays, reverbs, modulation. There was in essence under one roof. It had an effects loop for like 2 insert points for pedals that you could bring in analog pedals. And it was just way ahead of its time as far as what it did. And it really did sound excellent. I hope TC does something like that again, because I think that the TC stuff, I think maybe they use a little bit cheaper products than they used to use when it was, not owned by Harman. But I think that the sounds of the TC stuff is still really good. And so I still appreciate what it is that they do. I think also just generally to wrap this up, I think we're going to see a lot more of the interfacing between the digital and analog world. I think you're going to see a lot more of these amp simulations coming out. I think that you're going to see more pedals that sort of consolidate, like some of the bigger products, like Brian was mentioning, like a Kemper pedal, a miniature neural DSP pedal. I think you're going to see companies that start to have the ability to do this. I'd also like to see sort of like more open source type of stuff. Like, I know Brian Newneighbor had been talking about this a long time ago from Newneighbor, where you would essentially have a host pedal that you could put plugins onto. So like if you already bought a neural DSP plugin, or you already bought a UA plugin, you could have basically a host pedal that you could import a plugin that you already bought, and you would have available parameters on the pedal to be able to manipulate. And I think that his biggest concern was like, how do you deal with licensing, and will they allow this export, or, but my feeling is, why not? Like if you can create the licensing system where everybody is still making the money that they need to make off the license, why not allow people to be able to utilize those plugins on their pedal boards? I think it's a really smart idea. And I think a lot of those plugins sound really great. It'd be amazing to be able to have Echo Boy or Valhalla Reverb in a pedal format on my pedal board. And that's essentially what UA is doing with their own plugins, whether it's the Golden Reverb or, the Astra or whatever it is. That's essentially what they're doing. They've just adapted a version of their plugin that you can manipulate in a pedal hardware format. So I think that's the direction.
And I think Newneighbor did this. I'm trying to remember what the unit was called,
but
I think even on like
Slate.
a wet.
They had one called Slate that you could put any of their algorithms on, but you couldn't do third-party ones.
Yeah. So like that's the beginnings of that. But I guess opening it up to other companies is really the big step. Yeah.
I do remember, I got to say that I remember getting the Quad Cortex and messing with it and hearing you could load stuff on. My first question, I remember emailing them, and I was like, can you put plugins? Can you load your plugins onto the Quad? And they're like, oh yeah, well, eventually you'll be able to do that, which I thought was really cool. Opens up the technology for that. I was like, can you load other parties' plugins, like Strymon releasing a Big Sky plugin? Can you do that? Like, oh yeah, that's not something that you can do right now, but you never know. And they kind of left it at that. So I agree with you guys. I think it would be so cool to see. Imagine like having that where you can log into your account and you can download your plugins like you can on the Quad Cortex. You log into your account, you can download sounds to your Quad Cortex or your whatever you've done, your pedal captures, and have all that plugin stuff right there. Because I agree, that's really cool.
My prediction, I would say in the next year or two, you are going to be able to get a deep faked AI guitar lesson from anyone you want. So I think you'll be able to be on screen like this with Steve Vai and be like, hey, play me that solo from whatever. Play me that solo from this song and slow it down for me. And if I get stuck, teach me how to play these 3 notes that you always do, these repeating 3 notes. I think you'll be able to, in their style and their approach, you'll be able to get a guitar lesson from whoever it may be, especially with AI being able to analyze technique